If you've been playing World of Tanks for a while now, one of the game's saddest trends that you may have noticed over the years has been the decline of dedicated light tank players. Now, while some people will always naturally leave the game or explore different classes, this decline is largely due to the fact that the class of light tanks has ironically been left behind in this fast-paced meta. So why exactly is this? And where did it all go wrong? Today, I'm going to be answering those questions, and more importantly, I'm going to be showing you how we can fix it. So sit back, relax, and be ready, because the first thing that we're going to be addressing is the little gremlin that has been terrorizing all my light tanks for the past 5 years. This, of course, is the ELC Even 90. If you're a masochist like me and you enjoy playing light tanks, you might be all too familiar with a scene that usually unfolds something like this. It usually all starts when you queue up your light tank, you'll press the battle button, and before you can actually go back to ban Mountain Pass before you get into your session, something awaits you that is much, much worse. You realize in the loading screen that you're versus an ELC Even 90 on a spotting map. Now, of course, this doesn't always mean the end of the world, because occasionally you have super incompetent ELC Even 90 drivers that drive out in the open active spot, or they end up shooting from a bush that is super obvious, meaning you're able to actually dominate the battlefield. But more often than not, when you are the de facto spotter and the only spotter for your team, it means you have to face the ELC Even 90 face on at a game that it's much better at, and this is pure spotting. And we all know how this ends. Is it really any of a surprise that a tank with up to 70% stationary camo, decent view range, and speed enough to get into a good bush will outspot you? Absolutely not. Now, will somebody say that the ELC's lack of firepower helps make up in balance for its completely broken spotting abilities? As a light tank player, I would like to fervently disagree. You see, part of the art of playing light tanks is being able to dictate when you are going to engage enemy tanks, meaning you leverage your camo to get into an advantageous position where you are able to spot the enemies and where they're not able to spot you. At this point, you unload your clip or you damage them and then you run away. This is part of what makes the brass so powerful, and is exactly what also benefits the ELC Even 90, given that it has a potential clip damage of 660 damage. Mind you, within about 5 seconds, the LT-432 is only able to do about 360 in comparison. Do you see my point? The clip potential of the ELC Even 90 also means that if you are a tank with around 600 HP and it surprises you, you're as good as dead, whereas facing other light tanks you at least have a fighting chance. And while I could go on and on ranting about the ELC Even 90 and how it's a cancer in our current light tank matchmaking, it's not as if Wargaming couldn't give it mere matchmaking, meaning at the very least each team would have a fair shot at having a decent ELC Even 90 driver. But this doesn't even begin to address the problems that are plaguing light tank gameplay in today's current meta. No, for this we need to really take a step back and take a look at the underlying problems. So not only will this be a video ranting about the current state of light tanks, we're going to be proposing several solutions, and some that will be controversial. First, we need to talk about maps. This is the one factor that screws over all classes, but some not as much as others. Now obviously armored mediums and heavy tanks have it all the best because their armor and their firepower allows them to deal with the slugfest that most games have become over the past couple years. This same, however, cannot be said for light tanks, as the corridor map design that most maps follow leaves very little room for light tanks to actually fulfill their roles, their primary role being spotting and assisting, and the secondary role being damage dealing. And when you pair this with the fact that you might get Ensk, Mountain Pass, and Himmelsdorf all in the same night while you're playing your light tanks, you start to believe that Wargaming might actually hate light tanks. And while that's a half-tempting notion, the truth is that there's really only a handful of maps where light tanks can do their job properly. The sad reality of map design today is that most of them are made to reward armor, firepower, and brawling, while discouraging active plays, pushing, and flanking, the things that are core to light tank gameplay. And this is a very common pattern in World of Tanks maps design, is that you have one side that is supposed to be the easier side, and then you have one that is supposed to be the hard side where the slugfest goes along, and in the middle of these two is often a place that is the danger zone, or the place that is just not very rewarding to go to. And all this really doesn't go to enhance the gameplay that we have. So it made me really think, why in the world do we have map designs like this? And one of the things I came to the conclusion of is that because these type of designs slow down gameplay, this is exactly what World of Tanks wants. It's my personal hunch that Wargaming is designing maps that slow down gameplay because they recognize that the tanks that they've created have increased and sped up gameplay. It's tanks like the BZ line that have rockets, autoloaders, and just fast tanks in general are all tanks that add to a faster meta. Trying to control that with actual maps is one of the ways they can actually do this for all classes, and these corridor map designs are part of that. Now, this is obviously only one piece of the puzzle, and only one way that wargaming has actually attempted at slowing down the game, and there's much more to this than meets the eye. But this is something we're going to explore later on in another video. But first, we need to really try to address the problem of map design head on, while also recognizing that some of these solutions are going to take time. And one of the solutions that I do think is going to take quite a bit of time is reintroducing some pre-1.0 maps back into the game. Maps like South Coast, Sacred Valley, Windstorm, or Severgorsk are all maps that I think could be revamped and once again returned to the game. Now, I know this is a huge undertaking and it would take a lot of time and resources, of which I think wargaming is already using, to rework current maps that we have now, but this is something I think could actually have the possible benefit of engaging players that once have left the game, or of actually increasing the amount of players who are active and who are truly playing the game, not just once a week or something like that. The addition of extra maps cannot be understated, and it's something that absolutely does increase player engagement. Now, on the note of actually reworking these maps that are already existing in the game, I believe that this is something that wargaming really needs to take the time to listen to player feedback on. Now, if the community is asking for things like flanking opportunities on maps, the tentative changes to Oyster Bay, such as that tunnel that connects the two heavy tank brawling areas, is a really good idea. Additionally, I think adding bushes as soft cover and also rocks as hardcover help to advance the game in certain positions for certain types of playstyles. Now, this does come with a caveat that these positions, when you do add soft and hardcover, they need to be tested and procured in such a way that only certain classes can play them. When we have heavy tanks exclusively dominating all these places that are really aggressive, it does create a faster game, so I am aware that sometimes adding that hardcover and soft cover for something like TDs can have a negative effect when those additions are made to the game. So this has to be done in a tested way, and that does take time. But a far easier solution, and one that could be implemented much sooner, is the idea of guaranteeing light tanks on certain maps. Now, we've all experienced battles on Brukrovka or Malinovka where we have 0 light tanks, or for some reason they both die early, and the game drags on forever. Now, in the case where there's no light tanks, I think that something like this, where it drags out for 15 minutes and possibly ends in a draw, is just as bad as turbo battles. The quality of gameplay is just that low. So guaranteeing light tanks to be on those certain types of maps, number one, limits the amount of times where those types of battles are going to happen, and number two, it gives light tanks more of an opportunity to get on good maps for spotting, which is their primary role. And this idea would essentially solve 2 major gameplay quality issues in one go. But even with helpful solutions just like this, there are still many challenges posed to light tanks, and many of those are posed by tanks such as medium tanks that are just as good as fulfilling light tank roles. And if your mind immediately went to the Borask, you know what I'm talking about. Not only does it have the speed and the camo values that match certain light tanks at tier 8, it maintains the firepower of a true medium tank, and one with burst damage at that. I think the Borask is a shining example of how a tank sometimes will blend the playstyle of 2 classes. In this case, it's a medium and a light tank, and it really does hurt light tanks as a whole, because it kind of makes them obsolete. So then the question becomes, how do we level the playing field between tanks that are just as fast as light tanks and are better at damage dealing? Now, the knee-jerk reaction is that we need to nerf the Borask, maybe its speed or its camo, but we know that this is never going to happen because wargaming doesn't have the balls to nerf premiums. We've seen this in the past, and it's just never going to happen. Instead, maybe we need to be looking at a piece of equipment that Quickie Baby just loves putting on his medium tanks. And no, I'm not talking about vents, I'm talking about the other one, yes, CVS. We need to tackle the problem of CVS, especially with medium tanks. Said simply and unapologetically, I believe that CVS needs to be removed as an option for medium tanks. As I already stated before, medium tanks have the firepower advantage, and it's not even close. A lot of them have the armor to go up against heavies, and the survivability is a major difference between them. adding something like CVS so that they can rival a light tank's spotting abilities, something that it's supposed to be better at than any other class, is a dumb idea because it makes light tanks even more obsolete. So for those reasons, I think that CVS should be removed from medium tanks. But what about light tank versus light tank gameplay? For me personally, I'm not a fan of always having to bring CVS in order to be competitive. And what I mean by this is that if I am not bringing CVS, I feel like sometimes I'm griefing my own team and I'm griefing my own results because, number one, I'm not spotting the tanks that are making crosses at stupid places, and more importantly, I'm not going to be able to outspot the enemy light tank if they are using CVS. And now I've thought of a solution that would mean that CVS would only become active around like 420 meters view range, but something like this I'm not really quite sure of the implications of. I'm not sure how people would feel about this, and I'm not so sure that CVS being nerfed would really solve the problem. But it is a frustration of mine that essentially one equipment slot is always locked down no matter what when I go into a game as a light tank. And I would love to hear the feedback that you guys have on this. Do you guys have similar frustrations when you always have to use CVS in your light tanks? Do you guys actually use CVS in your light tanks? Let me know in the comment section, and I'd be happy to respond to you guys. Also, let me know if you think a nerf to CVS would be helpful, or if you guys have any other solutions. Put them in the comment section. But the next thing I want to talk about, I think would be much more helpful to light versus light tank gameplay, and this has something to do with the matchmaker. Currently, all light tanks are treated as the same exact role, meaning that an ELC Even 90 could very well be matched up against an M41 Walker Bulldog. One has more of a firepower-oriented gameplay style, while the ELC Even 90's gameplay style lends itself towards more of a spotter role. Now, this isn't much of an issue if changes like I mentioned early in the game with mirror matchmaking are implemented, but the solution needs to be going a step further. I believe that certain light tanks have very versatile gameplay styles, like the LT-432, where they actually have a lot of firepower plus a decent amount of spotting, while other ones are pure spotters, and of course we have the elephant in the room, which is wheeled light tanks. All three of these types of styles are extremely different, and I believe should be treated as such by the matchmaker, meaning that spotters will only ever go against spotting light tanks in a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning if there's ELC Even 90 layout team, or there's a Hawk 12, that it will always be paired up against something like a Hawk 12, or if there's an LT-432, it'll be paired up against something similar that has view range and firepower. I think dividing light tanks into subclasses such as reconnaissance light tanks, versatile light tanks, and wheeled light tanks, and pairing them in a 1-to-1 ratio in the matchmaker would help alleviate mismatches in the matchmaker where one team feels like they're at a disadvantage because they don't have the optimal light tank for the map that they're on. Now, the one thing to note with a solution like this is that it has the potential to make matchmaking queue times a little bit longer. However, I think a lot of light tank players would be much more happy with waiting just a little bit longer in order to get into a better, more balanced game. However, if this was an actual problem and Wargaming saw it as such, that matchmaking queue times could not be compromised, then adding this type of feature only in peak times when player count is up higher can also be something that can be done. What I mean by this is that more players means more light tanks that are being played, which alleviates the pressure on matchmaking to match up certain light tanks against one another. And this would mean better matchmaking for literally everybody on weekends, which is something we already complain about, which I think would be really smart because it drives engagement and better gameplay quality ever so slightly on the weekends. Now, another issue that we will quite often see, especially on the weekends, is the matchmaker putting 4 light tanks per team. Now, if you guys have been in a match like this, you know it is hell if you're a light tank player, because not only are you competing against the enemy's light tanks, you're competing against the other 3 light tanks on your own team. So I think for this reason, there needs to be a soft cap on the number of light tanks per team to 2 light tanks per team, and if it's absolutely necessary, there can be 3. I generally find that 2 light tanks per team is a sweet spot, meaning if one dies you have a failsafe, but I mean, come on, like 4 light tanks per battle should not be a thing that happens in modern day World of Tanks. We can do better for the matchmaker. And to circle back to the light tank classifications that I was talking about earlier, I think it would be really healthy if all of them had different times that they were spotted for. What I mean by this is that EBRs and wheeled vehicles could be spotted for 1 extra second because their mobility helps them dodge shells anyways. I don't really think that 1 second would be much of a nerf, but I think it's something that would be unique to their class. Just in the same way, I think it would be unique to versatile light tanks, the ones that have to expose themselves to get more out of the game and to contribute towards the game. for them to be spotted for 1 second less. And this would mean that when they actually are trying to contribute, when they are trying to actually shoot targets, there is a little bit less punishment involved for their trying. And I think this would be an overall positive, and I don't think it gives them too much of a leg up over, I don't know, the spotting light tanks that their main job is spotting anyways. I'm mainly putting this in here for uniqueness sake, but I do think there are some positives, especially for those versatile light tanks that need to be sticking their neck out just a little bit more to get something from the game. Now, the last two things I want to talk about are slightly more minor, but would absolutely help improve the gameplay that we see surrounding light tanks. The first of which involves EBRs. The community has complained for years that when you hit an EBR wheel, you should be getting assistance for when you slow it down. Why this is not a thing, I have no idea. Half the reason why my teammates with pretty poor aim are able to hit an EBR is the fact that it's not going at 80 miles per hour, but is now going at 50. We should be getting rewarded for this. Additionally, I think that maybe the hitboxes should be expanded just slightly. HE should do some type of splash. That's a whole other type of topic that needs to be addressed later. But something needs to be done, and unfortunately, it probably won't be because they haven't done it so far. The second thing that I want to talk about concerning light tanks is the fact that a whole lot of them got neutered as far as firepower and general stat changes in the 9.18 update. Now, there's a really good video on this made by Incoming that I'm going to link in the description below if you guys want to watch all the changes that were done. But one of the things I think would be so key in reviving light tank gameplay is sometimes giving back in some type of capacity the option for these tanks to have those guns. Now, I think the 10-shot autoloader on the Walker Bulldog is a little bit excessive. I think it was a little bit excessive back then. If you guys want to have an idea of what it would play like, there's a tank on WoT Tanks console that plays very similar to that, and I think it's a little bit overtuned in today's meta. However, I think some version of that could be reintroduced to make the gameplay of light tanks fun and versatile, especially if there's going to be the roles of spotter light tanks, versatile light tanks, wheeled light tanks. Those versatile tanks can absolutely be matched up against each other, and their job is to do damage. Now, solutions like these require a holistic approach. In the video, we took a look at maps first, then followed up by seeing what type of tanks are matched up against light tanks and dealing with a really key problem, which I think is CVS. Now, after this, we talked about how the matchmaker treats all light tanks the same, and how this really shouldn't be the case, and how they should be divided into 3 subgroups. And finally, we wrapped it up by covering some other minor changes, but the bottom line is that there is a lot of work to do when it comes to making light tanks viable once again. And I would love to hear your guys' feedback on which of these ideas do you think are the most pressing, and which of these would you like to see fixed first? Is it the matchmaking that you would like to see first, or is it something concerning the maps or CVS? Let me know in the comment section, and if you guys are interested in videos like these where I holistically approach problems and really dive deep into the issues and address different concerns from different players, I have a video on artillery where we address one of the common myths about artillery being very helpful in matches, and then go on to actually suggest different ideas and how we can make it much more bearable to play against and actually fit a role inside of World of Tanks. And I'll have that linked below, and it'll also be in the end screen. But if you guys enjoyed this video, let me know by clicking the like button and consider subscribing. It really helps me grow this channel and reach more people when you do so. I can't wait to share more ideas with you guys, and as always, have a great day. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.